Hey everybody, this is JD Gaming, welcoming you to another episode of the Best of Yu-Gi-Oh! A few weeks ago, I discussed some iconic cards that had their artwork altered in their transition from the Japanese official card game. But that segment was actually inspired by these cards I've wanted to discuss for a while, because some cards just had crazy overhauls to their design. Be warned though, this list does have a few unsettling images, so you'll want to make sure you're mentally prepared. With that out of the way, let's jump right into it with something spoopy. Mystic Tomato is one of the classic elemental recruiters, a sextet of level 4 1400 attack monsters from Magic Ruler who tutored a monster of their own attribute when they fell in battle. Despite liking tomatoes in real life, I actually didn't care much for Mystic Tomato's artwork as a kid because it's just so creepy. It turns out that the original artwork of Mystic Tomato was merely a regular tomato with a jack-o'-lantern-esque face carved into it. The best guess on the Yu-Gi-Oh! Wiki as to why this change was made in the first place is to make it less horrific, as is the case with a lot of these cards. But while that's accurate for many of the following entries, this one just seems like a sick joke. Kinda fitting that this next entry is one of Weevil Underwood's prominent pests. Parasite Parricide was a card that Weevil snuck into Joey Wheeler's deck early on in the Battle City tournament. When the creepy little cheater later forced it into play with Reckless Parasite, the bug infected each and every one of Joey's monsters, turning them into useless insects that fell right into Weevil's web. As he so kindly explains, a parasite is an insect or other creature that lives off of another. This is obviously represented in the card's effect to place itself into the opponent's deck, but did you know that the original artwork of this card actually depicted the parasite feasting on the face of this poor soldier? I sure didn't as a kid, and it was definitely for the best. Taking a moment to cleanse our eyes for a bit, ritual monsters like Relinquish were always fun to build with back in the day. In such a deck, it was handy to have cards like Sonic Bird and Senju of the Thousand Hands to collect the necessary spells and monsters to perform the ritual summon. The latter was a curious case because its art and name didn't directly seem to have anything obvious referring to rituals. At least Sonic Bird sounded like it swiftly grabbed you the spell. It turns out that the OCG art for Senju depicts a figure that looks very similar to a Buddhist deity who is said to have 1,000 hands. This brings a far more religious context into the card's design, which makes a lot more sense why it would be associated with a ritual summon. As for the naming convention, Senju literally means 1,000 hands. It's interesting that the name of its upgraded form, Manju, also means 10,000 hands, as its title would suggest. Yet this monster looks much more like the international version of Senju, regardless of the territory in which you play. Bagusk is a more recent card. In fact, it's the only one on this list I wouldn't classify as classic. The terribly tired tapir is actually based on the Japanese myth Baku, a tapir-like creature said to feed on dreams. This is why we see fluffy pillows and soft pastel colors in this monster's vicinity. But oh man, when this card was first announced for the OCG, people had a field day with wild theories as to how the art was going to be censored, because old Booska here was terribly tired for a totally different reason. Axe of Despair was a card I remember wanting as a kid, and why wouldn't I? With the power to beef up any monster by a full 1,000 points, it was the strongest equipped spell of the time and had a bonus effect that allowed you to recover it if it was ever picked off. A combination of traits that made it truly worthy of its ultra-rare status in Caveman Yu-Gi-Oh! I was perplexed when I discovered that the spell card was a member of the Archfiend archetype, much like Summon Skull, Beast of Tulwar, and a lot of the other early cards that didn't even mention that keyword anywhere. It turns out that this terrifying tool's Japanese name is Demon's Axe, which would be localized to Archfiend's Axe today. True to its name, the original artwork had the axe blade jutting out of a green skull attached to the same fleshy handle we see in the TCG, which looks far more like a gruesome weapon. As an aside, I also remember having a virtual copy of this card in an old video game and trading it to my neighbor, who jokingly gypped me with his skull servant. But seeing which one of these actually sees any kind of play today, I think that exchange somehow stood the test of time. Old DK here was included in the original starter deck Yugi, as well as a handful of other beginners decks in the Duel Monsters era. As one of the first cards many players owned, it seemed like a decent trade. Boost your very life force by 12.5% off one card. Of course, more experienced players tend to avoid this card altogether because there's so much more you can accomplish in this game with just one card. If you haven't seen Diane Keto the Cure Master's original art before and wondered why she was in the thumbnail, brace yourself for the real reason to avoid this card. I'm not gonna say much here. This artwork's not my cup of tea personally, but to each their own, eh? I will say that if this was the artwork given to a majority of the beginners at the dawn of their dueling years, the players and the very history of the game as we know it could have been drastically different. The opposite of boosting your own life points actually has competitive viability from time to time, as while you'll never exactly win by gaining a finite amount of life, you only need to deal 8,000 damage to end your opponent. Final Flame was one of the earliest burn cards in the game, and set the tone for that very terminology with its fiery theme. The TCG depicts this poor goblin getting roasted on an open fire, but its original artwork looks more like a horrific religious torture ceremony. Speaking of which, early Yu-Gi-Oh seems to have a fondness for this kind of thing. Last Day of Witch has a rather goofy international artwork of a cartoon witch smirking as she one-ups the Ghostbusters logo. The OCG artwork shows what may very well be events leading up to Final Flame, as women dressed in purple robes are being brutally coerced to a tall wooden cross with plenty of firewood at the base. Yikes! Is it time for another retinal refresher yet? How about this Heavenly Angel and Soul of the Pure? This card was a strict downgrade of Diane Keto's 1000 life point boost, probably because no feathered friend can compete with Big Mama K. On a more serious note, the OCG artwork depicts a completely different angelic figure performing a kind of bloodletting ritual. I suppose one could make the case that while the lifeblood of a pure being might be associated with healing properties, the act of self-harm involved to obtain it could very well be reflected in the loss of some healing power. We see a similar scenario in Ultimate Offering. Yes, this TCG artwork is abstract and rather terrifying. It looks like we're getting the personification, or rather monsterification, of paying 500 life points to perform an additional normal summon. The OCG artwork features a blood offering to this beast in the background, obviously referencing the symbolic nature of giving one's own lifeblood as the ultimate offering. In one particular instance of the Yu-Gi-Oh! GX anime, the OCG artwork is used, but the sanguine substance is replaced with some kind of green slime. While it's not very likely, I like to think of this as Cartoon Network's low-key bragging towards Nickelodeon, who only had the show rights in Latin America. My Valentine's Amazonas monsters were a fearsome bunch. I fondly remember pulling an ultra-rare Amazonas swordswoman at a local card shop as a kid, and when an older guy immediately asked me to trade for it, I calmly declined and just felt like a boss because someone actually wanted something from me for once. Yay! Their support cards can get quite annoying, as anyone who's played Duel Links against Demise
Amazonas Spellcaster
can tell you, but one of their trap cards sounded like a misnomer to me. Dramatic Rescue depicts a lady tied up to a tree, but not in any imminent danger as the two guards are leaving the captive clear on the other side, unaware of her approaching rescuer. The original art depicts a far more dire situation as the woman now finds her arm in the way of a falling guillotine. These large execution devices are commonly seen in the game. Card of Demise is one of Seto Kaiba's iconic power spells that retains a guillotine in the TCG, and the original artwork for Tragedy is literally a freestanding guillotine. Somehow, this reference to the death penalty was considered too morbid for our eyes, yet the West was graced with this graphic depiction of a woman being stalked by... Wait, is that a Saiyan? This guy totally looks like a monstrous ape, complete with the full moon in the background. I always thought the situation in this card was unsettling, but maybe it's not if that's your thing? Despite the last image and the terrifying tomato we began with being TCG artworks, the OCG has its fair share of grotesque imagery. Fiend Comedian was an interesting card that I always wanted to use in some grave-centric strategy, and it's got the seal of approval from these silly-looking goblins. But boy was I wrong. Underneath their jolly guys is the original OCG artwork, and fair warning, this was the most shocked I think I've ever been with an art change. Taunt received an alteration in a similar vein to our last duo. You may recognize the shorter guy as one of the critters who appears in Back to Square One and Lose One Turn, where he plays more of a comical role. But just imagine if they used these guys instead. Obviously, the change was made to avoid any references to gangsters or bullies, but man, I just love how they match these poses perfectly. There was also an episode of 5Ds where they aired the unaltered art to the international audience. I guess they figured that the big boys who play card games on motorcycles could handle it. Though I wasn't going in any particular order, this last one happens to be one of my personal favorites. Watt Cancel is a themed counter trap that allows you to pitch a Watt monster from your hand to negate the summon of an opponent's monster and destroy it. Its TCG artwork features a lightning bolt going through a big red X, which doesn't make all that much sense to me. This would seem to suggest that either the Watt monster is being summoned despite the X since it's phasing through, or that the lightning bolt is negating another card that negates. The original art makes it clear that the lightning bolt is being used to stop poor Ojama Yellow dead in its tracks, which is what this card actually does. For those at home crying foul at the violence towards the Ojamas, you gotta realize that the various cards that feature these intruders rotate their roles. We see Ojama Black getting terrorized by this minotaur-like creature as Yellow squeaks by in painful escape, Ojama Yellow having to make a really painful decision as he decides which of his friends to save, and Ojama Yellow getting operated on by Green. Hang on a second, it seems Yellow is getting the short end of the stick here more times than not. You know what? Forget what I said. Ojama Green has it best, screw that guy. Yellow deserves bad respect. And there you have it, 15 of Yu-Gi-Oh's craziest art changes. Yes, there are more. I know everyone wants to see more water emotics, but I just had to have fun with this list. Do feel free to share your personal favorites down below, and don't forget to subscribe if you enjoyed to catch the next episode. That's the end of this video, but there's plenty more where it came from. I invite you to explore the playlists on screen to see what else I have to offer, and if you really liked what you saw today, consider subscribing to JD Gaming for more Yu-Gi-Oh videos. Thanks guys, this is JD Gaming, hope you guys enjoyed as always, and I'll see you guys next time.